Well, again, good morning. And as I begin all sermons under the banner of the risen Lord, Jesus gives everything we do here purpose. Jesus gives everything, the resurrection gives everything we do here purpose. He gives it power. And we can celebrate, we can be transformed, we can be prepared by God because of this very reality right here. If you listen to the scripture reading, you know that we're thinking big about leadership. We've got, as you know, our brother Reggie Wright is before us, and he desires to be an elder. Now, this is not a situation where he came knocking on the door and said, "Hey, I want to be an elder here." Situation where the current elders said, "You know what? A little help wouldn't be terrible. Another person wouldn't be a bad idea." And so, you look around and you see who's already kind of doing that. And you say, "Hey, man, would you be willing to do this?" He says, "Sure, I'll do that." That's what he's talking about. If you aspire to do this, to be an elder, to be an overseer, to be a leader, that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to want to be a leader in God's church. So that's what we're talking about this week. We talked about it last week. We're going to talk about it again this week, what it means, what it's all about, being an elder. I'm going to talk about Reggie. I'm going to talk about other folks. And then we'll, then the task will be to kind of do this for a few weeks, and then we'll install our brother as an elder. But thinking big about leadership for us, because I could preach to Reggie and I could preach to the elders about, what they need to be doing to be good elders, to be good leaders. And this whole sermon could just be challenging 5 men in this room, or it could be about what I believe it should be about, and that is the rest of us. Because if we are going to think big about leadership, we have to first understand the importance of fellowship. Not fellowship, but fellowship. Because the same Bible that says the leaders ought to look like this and act like this and be like this and do these things and all that, the same Bible that says that tells us, obey your leaders and submit to their authority. They keep watch over you as men who must give an account. Obey them, and this is, in my opinion, the linchpin, the cornerstone of this passage. Obey them so that their work will be a joy, not a burden. For that would be of no advantage to you. So it's not just about having great leaders. It's about being great followers. If we want to have a growing, working, loving, living church, it's not the responsibility of the elders to make that happen. It's the responsibility of each one of us to be transformed so that God's power flows through us and challenges us and gets us out into the world, bringing people into this ministry so that they can elder them. And this is what I mean by they can elder them as they elder us. I was in a church a few years ago in Tennessee. I'm going to tell you this story, and this is going to be a very unconventional sermon, and you guys that are here hear me a lot think, "Oh, well, duh." So there's not going to be a whole lot of points, and there's not going to be a lot of ways to take notes. I just want you to listen and just think and just listen. I mean, I want you to listen every week, but just listen and think. Because what we do here is it's simple, yet it gets very complicated. It can get very convoluted real fast, because if you look around, there's what do we have in here right now? 120 some odd people? And if you asked 120 some odd people their opinion about things that we read in here, how many different answers are you going to get? 130, exactly. And so what that does is that makes leading people difficult because the stakes are so high, aren't they? I mean, we're talking about not just life and death like I was talking about earlier. We're talking about heaven and hell. We're talking about eternity with the true and living God or eternity without the true and living God. I mean, and people, let me just, a little, cheat sheet for you here. People get super excited and really territorial over that reality. I mean, they'll get downright feisty. You start talking about things that, I don't believe that. I don't believe this. So it's tough. It's like herding earthworms at some point. So we got to be good. We got to be good followers. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. And I love Grant. You know what his encouragement was for me right before I got up here? Hey, don't forget we don't have a clock in the back right now. Let me tell you something. Grant Niffen loves his people here, and he's protecting you against an all-day sermon. Don't be mistaken. And Grant, I've already looked up there 9 times already, and it's not there. So here's the story I want to share with you, and it gets to eldering here in a second. So I was at this church in Tennessee a few years ago, and the preacher, he's about my age now. He's early 50s, mid 50s. He's preaching a sermon, and he uses this one family as in this point that he's making, and he says, and it's a family that is, you wouldn't really call them a core family in this church, but they were there, they were regular, they were, they were involved, and they had a grandfather who was, he was getting on up there. He was late 80s, early 90s. But it wasn't like the late 80s, early 90s like we have here, like the real strapping, strong late 80s, early 90s. No, we got you there, Ron. We know it's nice and strong. But this old guy, he a lot of miles on him. He had a lot of, and not those city miles, not those country, highway miles, those country miles, those dirt road miles on you. He had a lot of miles on him. And he was in the hospital, and he was probably going to die. Yeah, doctors gave him a few weeks, maybe a month or so. And so they were talking about, what are we going to do? Is he going to stay in the hospital the rest of the time, or are we going to figure out a way for hospice to go home? Because he's only got, weeks, maybe a month or so. But see, the thing is, he wasn't a believer. The family was, and they were involved in church, and they, and all this. And now he was a nice guy. He was a good dude. He paid his taxes and took care of his pets and loved his wife, and, he was a good citizen. He just wasn't a believer. Didn't go to church. Meemaw would drag him, Christmas and Easter, he just wasn't a believer. And so the family goes to this preacher, and they ask him, hey, can you go to the hospital and just pray over Grandpa? We know his time is near. Can you just go and pray over him? Because, maybe, God will, perhaps, we read, a couple weeks ago in Jonathan and his armor bearer going up to the pass at Michmash. They said, perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf today. So they're begging, please, can you go and pray over him? Maybe, it'll be revealed to him. Maybe he'll believe. Maybe, he'll can you please go do this? And that preacher, I promise you, stood in front of a congregation of the Lord's people and said, I told them no. I wouldn't do it. Because Jesus says, do not put the Lord your God to the test. Our God will not be mocked. This man had all these chances. He had all this opportunity. He had an entire life. He had a family that believed. He had this. I will not put God to the test. That's what it sounded like in that auditorium also. Now there's different ways to think about this. He quoted 2 scriptures. It does say that. It does say, do not put the Lord your God to the test. It does say that the Lord your God will not be mocked. You sow, you reap what you sow. I mean, he used Bible and now there's some that are like, that's preposterous. That's ridiculous. That's blasphemous. That's this, that's that. You know, they're so angry at what he said and what he believes. And that was kind of where I was at the moment. And then there's others that are yes, sir, you know, protecting God and all of his glory and all of that. And they agree with him. And then there's others that are like, well, no, I don't. I mean, grace, and I don't feel, you know, in the 11th hour, and what do you do? And they're, you know. Now, that preacher believed that. And it was something that he was taught. And he knew that to be the truth for him. And there's others that were the same way. And here's my question. What do you do about that? What do you do? Because he believed that with his whole body, his core, every fiber of his being. He believed that, he was taught that, and he promoted that. And there's people in this room right now that are struggling with, well, I mean, it does say that. So what do you do? Guys, that's what elders deal with. What do you do? Those aren't easy answers. Those aren't easy because we've all grown up, believing what we believe, learning what we learn, hearing what we hear, and we all have this concept of God. We all have this belief system about God. We all have this understanding, these expectations about God. And like I said, the stakes are high. So what do you do when those ideas collide and what someone believes, what they read in the same book we're reading, and they have a completely different understanding, expectation? What do you do? Well, for us, you know what we can do? What we, as the people who are here, if you're a member, if you're visiting, you want to jump on board with what we're doing and get involved in the ministry, you know what we can do? We can keep our very small, personal issues to a minimum and allow them to deal with real spiritual issues. You know, one of the things I'm convinced is that the big spiritual problems of this age are neither big nor spiritual. Because I think a lot of times the church calls on their elders to be traditional gatekeepers and not spiritual leaders. Because we want them to keep watch and to guard all of the things that we feel comfortable with in our traditional understanding and outworking of our relationship with God. And if anything kind of gets a side on that, they better lock that down or we're going to go somewhere else. Can we stop that? Can we just stop that? And be good followers. Just be good followers. And you know how you be a good follower? Do things that will excite your leaders. I know these guys personally. You know what I know excites them? When they have real spiritual questions to answer. And you know how we get those? By getting people in here that have real spiritual questions. Because let me tell you something. If we start growing, we're growing, but if we continue to grow, guess what we're going to do? We're going to attract people who have some really kooky ideas about Jesus. And that is a biblical term. You can look it up. It comes from the Greek koukamas. They're going to have some kooky ideas. And you know what we need to do? We need to be out there and bringing them in here. Not so that we can set them straight, but so that we can love them enough to where they fall in love with the true and real Jesus. And they go out in the world and introduce him to other people. See, that's a church. Because you know what? The Rotary Club will fight over their traditions. The Lions Club will they got rules and regulations that you got to do things a certain way, and the Shriners and everybody else, they've got all these rituals. And you know what we need to have? We need to have a bunch of people who are so in love with Jesus that they're out telling people about him, so we bring them in here, and they can meet and love on people, and they've got questions, and we got people that'll talk to them. They might not have answers for everything, but we got people that'll talk to them. So that's my whole sermon this morning, is to be good followers. To be passionate Christ followers. Out, not looking for faults and flaws in all of our brothers and sisters and other churches, but looking for people who are lost and dying without Jesus. And telling them the story. So you got 2 weeks. You got 2 weeks. If you got any problem with Reggie, now's your time to speak up. I mean, not right now, because that'll get awkward. But you got 2 weeks. If you got any issues, any problems, anything, what you do is you talk to our current elders. You know what they're going to do? First thing they're going to do is they're going to call Reggie, and you're all going to meet face to face. And let me tell you something. If Grant Niffin's in that meeting, be prepared for some direct questions. Because he will ask direct questions. Because Grant's bold. And he needs to be. Because that's what he brings to this group, is a boldness to ask difficult questions, awkward questions, accountability questions. Because he just wants to get to the truth. And let me tell you something else. If Charlie Onaveris is in that meeting, you know what he's going to be thinking? Even as you're accusing or being accused or whatever, you know what Charlie's going to be thinking? He is going to know the love of God. But you know what Charlie does? He has this beautiful way of seeing both sides of things and knowing. You know what? He knows that sinners aren't just people who sin, but they're people who are sinned against. And he understands that when you're coming, if Steve's coming at me, he knows it's because Steve's been through some things, and Steve's hurting, and I'm hurting, and all that. And he sees that, and it hurts him. And he's able to love people in the middle of disagreements, because he can see that while there might be issues, man, we're all broken. And if Ron Nissing's in that meeting, he's just going to be praying that God's will and the truth prevail. Because let me tell you something, that man is a lover of the truth. And he will just pray that God's will, not that ours, not that our agenda, not that our plans, not that anything. What he's praying, God, defeat us if we're planning something that steps outside of your will just 1 millimeter. And he wants the truth. And I promise you, if Eric Marr's in that meeting, it's going to be bathed in prayer. I mean, bathed in prayer. Prayer that you can hear, prayers that you'll never hear. I'm telling you, if that man is nothing, he is a prayer. And he has a measured response that only comes after talking to and listening for God. And I look forward to when Reggie's in that meeting. Because you want to talk about a man who has been strengthened by a headwind in this world. Who comes from a long line of lovers of God. Who will not be swayed, but who is kind and merciful. So if you got anything to say, you got 2 weeks to say it. And you've got some of the best men that I've ever known or heard of to talk to them about it. And if you want to be a part of a of a growing, thriving, loving, working church, look around, we got plenty of seats. And let's do something that excites these guys. Let's bring people that have real questions and real needs. Not just hurt feelings because we think it should be this way or that way. So we got to think big about leadership, guys. We got to be going somewhere big to think big about that. And let me tell you something. Coming to this place and protecting our way of life is not big enough. Being the gatekeepers of this hour and worrying these men to death over whether or not we did this or did that right or should have done, should have said or what, doing that is not big enough. But growing the kingdom, let's give these men fits over growing this kingdom. But their schedules are packed with people who just want to know more about the love and mercy of Jesus Christ. Amen? So we got a song to sing. What's our next song? There's a fountain free. And you know what? That's a beautiful song to think about. There is a fountain free. And we live among a people who are thirsty as they can be. I mean, they are just thirsty. Let's tell them about it. Let's tell them about it as together we stand and as we sing.